The truck's engine died with a shudder that felt too final, too much like surrender. Margot Hayes sat behind the wheel for a long moment, hands still gripping the leather knuckles white from the drive she'd been making for the past 11 hours. The kind of drive you take when you're not running towards something, just away. Through the windshield, Pine Ridge spread out like a postcard someone had left in the sun too long. Population 847, according to the sign she'd passed 2 miles back. The kind of town where people still waved at strangers and meant it, where the diner served coffee in chipped mugs and the mechanic knew your name by the second oil change. The kind of place where a woman could disappear without anyone asking why. Margot was 32 years old. Auburn hair pulled back tight enough to give her a headache she'd stopped noticing 3 states ago. Gray-blue eyes that had seen too much of what people did to each other when they thought no one was watching. She wore a field jacket the color of old moss flannel underneath in shades of gray that matched the sky cargo pants that had pockets for things she didn't carry anymore. FBI credentials. A sense of purpose. The belief that the system worked if you just followed it hard enough. She'd left all of that in a desk drawer in Minneapolis, along with the illusion that loyalty meant anything when money was involved. In the passenger seat, Ranger lifted her head. 5 years old sable coat that shifted from charcoal to copper, depending on the light amber eyes that held a kind of patient intelligence most humans never achieved. German Shepherd FB Bond trained specialized in explosives and contraband detection. Retired now, same as Margot. They'd both earned it the hard way. The dog's ears swiveled forward, reading the new environment with the focused attention of an animal who understood that details mattered. Who knew that the difference between safe and not safe often came down to one scent, one sound, one moment of hesitation. "We're here," Margot said. Not to the dog, really, just to the silence. Ranger's tail moved once against the seat, acknowledgement, not celebration. Margot stepped out into October air that tasted like wood smoke and coming snow. The town square sat quiet under an overcast sky. Hardware store, post office, a church with white clapboard siding, and a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. And across the street, a diner with a hand-painted sign that read, dots in letters the color of sunrise. She'd bought land here. Sight unseen, paid in cash from savings she'd been building for a retirement that was supposed to come in 20 years. 15 acres of nothing according to the listing. No structures, no utilities, just trees and quiet, and the kind of distance she needed between herself and the memories of what happened when you trusted the wrong person. The real estate agent had been smooth, professional, a man named Gideon Mercer who spoke in the calm, reasonable tones of someone selling peace of mind instead of property. "You'll love it," he'd said over the phone. "Peaceful, private, the kind of place where you can finally breathe." He'd been right about one thing. The air here was clean. Ranger dropped from the truck with the economical grace of a working dog. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She hit the ground and immediately began processing. Nose to the gravel, then up, reading the wind that carried scents Margot would never detect. Exhaust and fryer oil, and someone's wood stove burning aspen. The chemical signature of a town that still used leaded paint on its fences and antifreeze that should have been banned a decade ago. The dog's shoulders relaxed fractionally. Not dangerous, just new. "Come on," Margot said. They crossed the street together, Handler and K9 moving in the synchronized rhythm of two beings who'd learned to read each other in situations where mistakes meant body bags. Margot's hand didn't touch her hip where her service weapon used to ride, but the absence pulled at her like a phantom limb. The diner's door opened with a bell that sounded like it had been ringing since 1952. Inside, the smell hit immediately. Coffee, bacon, grease, pie crust baking somewhere in the back. The kind of smell that wrapped around you and tried to convince you that the world was simpler than it actually was. 3 customers. An old man at the counter reading a newspaper that was folded to the obituaries. 2 women in a booth by the window, heads bent together over something on a phone screen. And behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a bun and eyes that saw everything. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," the woman said. Her voice carried the particular warmth of someone who'd spent 40 years making strangers feel welcome and meant every word of it. Margot took a booth in the back corner. Tactical position, wall behind her a clear line of sight to both exits, windows on 2 sides. Old habits didn't die, they just relocated. Ranger settled at her feet, chin resting on paws, but her ears stayed active. Tracking conversations, footsteps, the rhythm of the kitchen. Never fully off duty. Margot understood that better than most people would. The woman from the counter appeared with a coffee pot and a menu. Up close, her name tag read Dorothy, but it had been crossed out in marker, and replaced with Dot. The writing looked old, faded from years of being washed. Just got in, Dot asked, already pouring coffee without being asked. About 5 minutes ago. Long drive from the look of you. Not a question. An observation delivered with the casual expertise of someone who'd been reading people since before Margot was born. Long enough, Dot's eyes flicked down to Ranger, then back up. Beautiful dog, trained FBI, retired. Something shifted in Dot's expression. Not suspicion exactly, more like recognition. The look of someone who understood that when people came to Pine Ridge, they were usually coming from something not to it. We don't get many federal agents, Dot said carefully. I'm not an agent anymore, just looking for quiet. Dot nodded slowly like she was tasting the truth of that statement and deciding whether to believe it. Well, you found it. Quiet's about the only thing we've got in abundance. She pulled an order pad from her apron. What can I get you? Whatever's good. Everything's good, honey. That's not helpful. The corner of Margot's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Surprise me. Dot's eyebrows rose fractionally, then she turned and headed back toward the kitchen, calling out something that sounded like short stack eggs over bacon crisp, in a voice that carried authority. Margot sat with her coffee, watching the street through the window. The town moved at a pace that felt pharmaceutical. A truck rolled past doing maybe 20 miles an hour. A woman pushed a stroller across the crosswalk, taking her time not looking for traffic because there wasn't any to look for. The hardware store across the way had a display of rakes and leaf bags arranged with the kind of care usually reserved for art installations. This was what normal looked like. What life looked like when it wasn't being filtered through surveillance footage and witness statements in the cold arithmetic of how many lies it took to bury the truth. The door opened again. The bell rang. Margot's eyes tracked the movement, automatically cataloging without conscious thought. Man, 43, maybe 44, judging by the gray at his temples and the lines around his eyes. 6'1", lean in the way that came from functional strength rather than gym vanity. Dark hair cut military short, going silver at the sides. Gray-blue eyes that swept the room once fast, then settled. He wore an olive field jacket that had seen actual use elbows, worn thin pockets, sagging from years of carrying weight. Flannel underneath red and navy, cargo pants in shades of brown and green that belonged in a forest, not a diner. Boots that had been resoled at least twice. And at his side, a German shepherd. Male older than Ranger, brown and tan coat with a black saddle, so dark it absorbed light. The dog moved with the careful economy of an animal who'd learned that energy was a resource you didn't waste. The man's eyes found Margot's, held for 1 second, 2. The kind of look that recognized something familiar in another person's face. Not attraction, not threat, just the weary acknowledgement of shared experience. He chose a booth 3 down from hers. The dog settled beside him without being told, positioning himself with a clear view of the door. Tactical, trained. Dot appeared with Margot's food before she could process what she was seeing. Pancakes, eggs, bacon that crackled when she touched it with her fork. And on the edge of the plate, 2 sausage links. Wasn't sure if your partner there would want something, Dot said, nodding at Ranger. Margot looked down. Ranger's nose was working the air, processing the scent of the sausage with the thorough attention she'd once applied to suspicious packages. The dog's head tilted slightly to the left. One ear drooped, and then in a gesture so deliberate it bordered on theatrical, Ranger turned her head away. Complete rejection. Margot felt something unexpected rise in her chest, laughter maybe, or the memory of what laughter used to feel like. She's particular, Margot said. I can see that. Dot was grinning now, the kind of grin that said she'd been charmed despite herself. Smart girl. Those sausages are from a distributor out of Duluth. Been trying to get Hank to switch suppliers for 3 years. From the booth 3 down, a voice. Low economical. She knows quality when she smells it. The man wasn't looking at them. His attention was fixed on the menu, but his dog's ears had swiveled toward Ranger. Reading her the way she was reading him. Margot met his eyes across the distance. Yours looks like he's made the same assessment. Titan doesn't eat anything that doesn't meet his standards. Makes feeding him interesting. Titan, Margot repeated. The name fit. Ranger. A nod. Brief. Military FBI. You Navy. Past tense. The conversation ended there. Not because there was nothing more to say, but because they both understood that some questions didn't need asking. Why are you here became, why are you running, became what are you trying to forget? And those weren't first meeting questions. Those were third drink questions, or maybe 4th month questions, or maybe never questions at all. Margot ate in silence. The food was better than it had any right to be. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and Ranger stayed at her feet warm and solid and present in the way that only a dog could be. No judgment, no questions, no expectations beyond the next moment and the one after that. When she finished, Dot appeared with the check. Margot left cash, including a tip that made Dot's eyebrows rise. "You planning to stay in town?" Dot asked. "Bought some land north of here. 15 acres. Something flickered across Dot's face. Too fast to read, but it registered. The old Crow property. "I don't know what it used to be called. Just know it's mine now." Dot's hand tightened fractionally on the coffee pot. "Who sold it to you?" "Man named Gideon Mercer, development consultant." The temperature in the diner dropped 5 degrees. Margot felt it before she understood it. The shift in air pressure that happened when a room full of people all stopped talking at the same time. The old man at the counter folded his newspaper very carefully. The two women in the booth went silent, and in the booth 3 down, the man with the gray-blue eyes looked up. "Mercer sold you the Crow land," Dot said. "Not a question. Is that a problem?" Dot opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Honey, I don't know what he told you about that property, but—" The door opened. The bell rang, and the man who walked in wore a smile like expensive cologne, subtle, pleasant, designed to make you lean in closer before you realized it was covering something. Gideon Mercer looked exactly like his voice had sounded over the phone. Mid-40s, fit in the way that came from tennis and personal trainers. Charcoal suit that probably cost more than Margot's truck hair, styled with product that caught the diner's fluorescent lights. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and walked with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no and meant it. "Ms. Hayes," he said, spotting her immediately. His smile widened. "I thought I might find you here. Welcome to Pine Ridge." Margot stood slowly. Ranger rose with her, positioning herself between Margot and the new arrival. Not aggressive, just present. "Mr. Mercer?" "Please, Gideon." He extended a hand. Margot shook it. His grip was firm, practiced, calculated to convey trustworthiness. "I wanted to make sure you found the property all right. I know the directions can be a bit tricky once you get past County Road 7. "I haven't been there yet, just got into town." Of course, of course." He glanced around the diner like he was seeing it for the first time, even though Margot would bet money he'd been coming here for years. "Well, whenever you're ready, I'm happy to show you around. Make sure you know where the boundaries are, point out the best spots for a cabin, that sort of thing." At Margot's feet, Ranger's body language shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible unless you'd spent 5 years learning to read every twitch of muscle, every flicker of ear position. The dog's shoulders tightened, her weight shifted forward fractionally, and the growl that formed in her chest was so low Margot felt it through the floor before she heard it. Warning. Margot's hand dropped to Ranger's head. The contact was enough. The dog subsided, but she didn't relax. Her amber eyes stayed locked on Gideon with the focused intensity she usually reserved for suspicious packages. Gideon either didn't notice or pretended not to. "Beautiful animal," he said, trained to her yes. "I've always admired working dogs. Such loyalty." He pulled a business card from his portfolio and set it on the table. "My cell's on there. Call anytime if you need anything." "I mean that. Part of the service." He left before Margot could respond. The door closed behind him. The bell rang, and the diner stayed silent for a long moment after he was gone. Dot was the first to speak. "That dog of yours doesn't like him much." "She's particular," Margot said again. But the word felt different this time. Heavier. From the booth 3 down, the man with Titan stood. He walked over and up close. Margot could see the lines around his eyes. The kind that came from squinting into too much sun or too much sand. The kind that came from places where the light was too bright and the choices were too dark. "Callan Thorne," he said. "Margot Hayes." His eyes flicked down to Ranger, then back up. "Your dog read him." "Yours did too." At their feet, both German shepherds sat perfectly still, amber eyes and dark eyes, both tracking the street where Gideon's car had pulled away. Two animals who'd never met arriving at the same conclusion through independent channels. "Dogs don't lie." Callan's jaw tightened. "I've been in town 2 weeks. Came here for the same reason I'm guessing you did. Needed quiet." "And it's quiet," he paused, "until it isn't." Margot waited. 3 years ago, Callan said, "a man named Silas Crow lived on the land you just bought. Pastor at the church across the street. Good man from what I've heard. Cared about this town, cared about the people in it." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "He went hiking one morning, never came back. The air in the diner felt too thin. They find a body. Search went on for 2 weeks. Nothing. Sheriff ruled it misadventure. Case closed. But you don't think so? Callan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. I think your dog just told you everything you need to know about Gideon Mercer. And I think Titan's been telling me the same thing since the day I met the man. Question is whether we're going to listen. Before Margot could answer, her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Keys are in the lockbox by the gate. Code is 4739. Enjoy your new home. GM. She showed Callan the screen. He read it, then looked at her. You going out there today? That was the plan. Mind if Titan and I tag along? I've been meaning to check out that area. See what the trails are like. It wasn't a request for permission. It was an offer of backup. The kind you made when you'd spent enough time in places where going alone meant not coming back. Margot looked down at Ranger. The dog looked back at her with eyes that held no doubt, no fear, just the steady certainty that wherever Margot went, she went too. All right, Margot said. Let's see what I bought. The road north out of Pine Ridge turned from asphalt to gravel after 2 miles, then from gravel to dirt after another 3. Trees closed in on both sides, pine and birch and aspen already starting to turn gold at the edges. The sky overhead had gone the color of old zinc, heavy with weather that hadn't decided whether to fall as rain or snow. Margot's truck led. Callan's followed in a pickup that looked military surplus, all hard angles and function over form. Both vehicles moved slowly, navigating ruts that could swallow a tire if you weren't careful. In the passenger seat, Ranger sat with her nose pressed to the window, reading the forest with the focused attention of a dog who understood that terrain mattered, that knowing the landscape meant knowing where danger could hide, where escape routes existed, where the line between safe and not safe got drawn in the dirt. The GPS on Margot's phone showed the property boundary approaching. Another quarter-mile. The road narrowed, even further branches scraping against the truck's sides like fingernails on metal. And then Ranger's entire body went rigid. Not the alert position she used for explosives, not the focused intensity she showed for contraband. This was different, older. The kind of reaction that came from somewhere deeper than training down in the part of the brain that still remembered when survival meant reading signs the modern world had forgotten how to see. The dog's ears pinned, flat. Her lips pulled back fractionally, not a snarl, just exposure. And the sound that came from her chest wasn't a growl. It was lower, more fundamental. The kind of sound that said, stop, in a language that didn't need translation. Margot hit the brakes. The truck slid slightly in the loose dirt, then caught. Behind her, Callan's vehicle stopped too. Margot looked at Ranger. What is it? The dog's amber eyes were locked on something ahead, past the bend in the road, where the trees grew so thick the light barely penetrated. Her body language screamed wrongness so loudly Margot could almost hear it. A knock on the driver's side window. Callan standing in the dirt with Titan at his side. Margot rolled down the window. Your dog's reading something, Callan said. So's yours. And it was true. Titan stood with his head lowered, hackles raised along his spine, every muscle coiled tight. The two dogs had never worked together, had never trained together, had probably never even been in the same room before today. But they were synchronized perfectly. Same stance, same focus, same absolute certainty that something ahead was wrong. We can turn around, Callan said, but his voice carried no conviction. Margot opened the door and stepped out. The October air hit her face cold enough to make her eyes water. She pulled on the field jacket she'd left in the back seat, zipped it halfway. I bought this land, she said. I'd like to see what I'm paying for. Callan nodded once. He didn't argue, didn't try to talk her out of it. Just reached into his truck and pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that doubled as a weapon if you needed it to. They walked. Margot and Ranger in front, Callan and Titan slightly behind and to the left. Standard formation, the kind you used when you didn't know what you were walking into, but knew it probably wasn't friendly. The road curved, the trees opened up slightly, and there in a clearing that shouldn't have existed this deep in the forest sat something that made Margot's brain stutter trying to process it. A rail car. Not a piece of one. Not wreckage. A complete intact logging rail car from maybe the 1930s, painted in faded reds and yellows that had been dulled by decades of weather. It sat at an angle partially sunken into the earth like something that had been dropped from a great height and left to settle. Rust bloomed across the metal in patterns that looked almost organic. Vines had claimed the undercarriage, and the door hung open, darkness inside. That's not on any satellite image, Callan said quietly. Margot pulled out her phone. No signal. Of course not. They were too far from town, too deep in the trees. But she'd downloaded offline maps before leaving Minneapolis, the kind that showed property lines and geological surveys and historical landmarks. There was nothing on the map where the railcar sat. Just forest. Empty, uninterrupted forest. Ranger moved forward slowly, nose working the air around the railcar with systematic precision. Titan mirrored her from the other side. Both dogs processed the scene with the careful attention of animals who knew that carelessness killed. Neither dog alerted for explosives. Neither showed signs of detecting contraband. But they also didn't relax. Their body language stayed locked in the gray zone between caution and alarm. Margot approached the open door. Up close, she could see that the railcar was older than she'd thought. The riveting pattern, the style of the hinges all pointed to construction from the early 20th century. This thing had been here longer than the trees growing around it. She pulled her flashlight from her jacket and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness inside the railcar, illuminating metal walls eaten through with rust. A floor covered in dirt and dead leaves and things that had probably been alive when they wandered in and weren't anymore. And on the far wall, bolted into place with hardware that looked newer than everything else, a metal lockbox. Margot stepped inside. The floor creaked under her weight but held. Ranger followed immediately, positioning herself between Margot and the door. Guard position. The lockbox was industrial-grade weatherproof, the kind designed to survive conditions that would destroy everything else. Someone had secured it recently, within the last few years, judging by the condition of the bolts. It wasn't locked. Margot opened it. Inside, preserved in plastic sheeting that had kept moisture out, she found documents. Environmental reports, soil samples, photographs, all of it organized with the meticulous care of someone who understood that evidence had to be preserved or it meant nothing. She pulled out the first report. The header read Northern Minnesota Environmental Assessment, dated 3 years ago. The signature at the bottom belonged to someone named Silas Crow, the same man who'd disappeared, the same man who'd owned this land before Gideon Mercer sold it to her. Margot flipped through the pages. Technical language, chemical analyses, contamination levels that painted a picture of soil that had been poisoned deliberately, systematically, by dumping that should have been reported, investigated, prosecuted. But the dates on the reports had been altered. Not well, but enough that someone skimming quickly might miss it. Enough that official records would show a timeline that didn't match reality. Cover-up, professional, careful, the kind that required access and authority and the willingness to bury truth under bureaucratic weight. At the bottom of the lockbox, underneath all the technical documentation, Margot found a letter. Handwritten, the ink slightly faded, but still legible. If you're reading this, your dog heard what I couldn't say. My name is Silas Crow. I was the pastor at Pine Ridge Community Church for 12 years. I loved this town. I loved the people in it. And when I discovered what was happening to the land beneath their feet, I thought telling the truth was the right thing to do. I was wrong about what right meant. Not wrong about the truth. Just wrong about who would listen. The contamination is real. The evidence is real. But the people who caused it have more money than this town has hope, and they've made it clear that silence is the only option they're willing to accept. I've hidden what I found here in the place where they dumped the first barrels. They thought no one would ever find this rail car. Thought the forest had swallowed it decades ago. But I grew up in these woods. I know every clearing, every trail, every place where the earth doesn't sit quite right. If you're standing here reading this, it means one of two things. Either you bought this land and wondered why it was so cheap, or you came looking because you heard I went missing, and you're the kind of person who doesn't believe in coincidence. Either way, you need to know they're watching, not with cameras or drones, with money, with influence, with the kind of power that makes people look the other way because it's easier than looking directly at what's wrong. I don't know if I'm alive when you read this. I don't know if I had the courage to stay when staying meant losing everything I've built here. But I know this truth doesn't need permission. It just needs someone willing to carry it. Listen to your dog. They know when something's wrong before we do. Silas. Margot read the letter twice. Then she photographed every page of every document, the camera on her phone working in the low light, each image saving to encrypted storage that synced whenever she found signal. When she stepped back outside, Callan was waiting. Titan sat at his side, both of them facing the forest with the alertness of centuries. "Find something?" Callan asked. Margot handed him the letter, watched his face as he read it, saw the muscles in his jaw tighten, the way his eyes went flat and cold and distant. The expression of a man who'd seen this story before in different places with different names, but always ending the same way. "He's talking about toxic dumping," Callan said quietly. "Industrial scale. And someone covered it up. Someone with enough pull to make a pastor disappear without raising questions that couldn't be answered." Callan looked at the rail car, then back at Margot. You know what this means. It means the land I just bought is probably contaminated. It means Gideon Mercer sold me a liability and called it peace and quiet. It means more than that. Callan's voice was soft, but it carried weight. It means your dog read him correctly. It means Titan's been right about him since day one. And it means if we start asking questions, we become the next problem that needs solving. At their feet, Ranger and Titan stood perfectly still. Two dogs who'd never met before today, positioned like bookends. Alert, focused, united in the certainty that the humans they'd bonded to were standing at the edge of something dangerous. Margot looked at the letter in Callan's hand, at the rail car that shouldn't exist, at the forest that had hidden both for years. I came here to disappear, she said. So did I. Disappearing means not asking questions. Usually. Margot met his eyes, saw the same calculation happening behind them that was happening in her own mind. The math of risk versus responsibility. The weight of walking away versus staying. The knowledge that once you knew something unknowing, it wasn't possible. Your dog refuses to leave, Callan said. It wasn't a question. Margot looked down. Ranger sat at the edge of the clearing, amber eyes fixed on the rail car with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. The dog's entire body language said stay, said this matters, said you're needed here. She does that sometimes, Margot said. Titan's the same, Callan paused. Doesn't usually listen when I tell him to move on. The silence between them stretched long enough to matter, long enough for both of them to understand what they were agreeing to without saying it directly. Finally, Margot pulled out her phone. Still no signal, but the documents were saved. The evidence was preserved. And somewhere in the forest, a man named Silas Crow had left a message for whoever came next. Listen to your dog. I need to get back to town, Margot said. Find signal. Start making calls. To who? I don't know yet. Someone who will listen. Callan's expression said he'd heard that before, had probably said it himself in other places about other truths that needed telling. And if no one listens, then we make them. They walked back to the trucks. The dogs followed, falling into formation without being told. And as Margot climbed behind the wheel, she felt the familiar weight of purpose settling back onto her shoulders. The weight she'd driven 11 hours to escape. But Ranger was right. Some things you didn't walk away from, even when walking away was all you'd come here to do. The library in Pine Ridge occupied a building that looked like it had started life as something else. Maybe a bank, judging by the heavy doors and the windows set too high to reach without a ladder. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and lemon polish, and the particular silence that only existed in places where people came to think instead of talk. Margot sat at a corner table with her laptop open and 3 books on local history stacked beside her. Ranger lay beneath the table, chin on pause, but her ears tracked every footstep, every door opening, every shift in the building's rhythm. Across from Margot, Callan spread out printed satellite images he'd pulled from a geological survey database. Titan sat at his feet, mirroring Ranger's position with the synchronization of dogs who'd decided they were working the same case. The librarian, a woman in her 70s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a cardigan that had seen better decades, had looked at both dogs when they entered. Then at Margot and Callan, then back at the dogs. Service animals, she'd asked, but her tone said she already knew the answer. Working dogs, Margot had replied. Retired. The librarian had nodded once. Long as they don't bark at the college students. They're jumpy enough as it is. Now 2 hours into research that was painting an uglier picture with every document they found, Margot understood why Silas Crow had hidden his evidence in a rail car instead of filing it through proper channels. The proper channels had been compromised from the start. She pulled up another environmental report, this one from 5 years ago. Routine soil testing, the kind the county commissioned every decade to track agricultural viability. The results showed contamination levels that should have triggered immediate investigation. Heavy metals, industrial solvents, compounds that had no business being in forest soil. But the report had been filed, noted, and quietly archived. No follow-up, no enforcement action, just bureaucratic acceptance of poison in the ground. Look at the signature, Callan said, pointing to the bottom of the page. Margot leaned closer. The approving official was someone named Douglas Werner, listed as County Environmental Coordinator. She pulled up the county website, navigated to the staff directory. Douglas Werner had retired 2 years ago, moved to Arizona. The new coordinator was someone younger, probably cleaner, definitely not in office when the decisions were made to bury the evidence instead of the contamination. Dead end, Margot said. Not completely. Callan tapped another section of the report. This was countersigned by the development consultant on record for the industrial permits in that zone. Margot didn't need to look. She already knew what name would be there. Gideon Mercer. The door to the library opened. Both dogs' heads came up simultaneously, ears forward, bodies tensing with the coordinated precision of an early warning system. A woman entered, late 30s, wearing jeans and a fleece jacket with Pine Ridge Elementary embroidered on the breast. Dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, sharp eyes that had learned to read a room before entering it. She carried a stack of books that looked like they'd been checked out by someone who couldn't decide between fantasy and true crime. Emma Lassiter, the fourth-grade teacher Margot had heard about from conversations overheard at the diner. The woman who'd lived in Pine Ridge her entire life and knew everyone's business without being gossipy about it. Emma saw Margot and Callan at the corner table and hesitated. Just for a second, just long enough for Margot to notice. Then she crossed to the returns desk, set down her books, and started to leave. "Excuse me," Margot said. Emma stopped, turned. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "Yes, you're local." A pause. "I teach fourth grade at the elementary school. Have for 8 years." Margot pulled out a chair. "I'm Margot Hayes. This is Callan Thorne. We're new in town trying to understand some of the history here. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Emma looked at the chair, then at the ones, then at the satellite images spread across the table. Whatever she saw in that combination made her decision. She sat. "Emma Lassiter," she said, "what kind of history are you asking about?" Callan pushed one of the environmental reports across the table. "The kind that involves Pastor Silas Crow and the land north of town." Emma's face went very still. Not blank. Still. The way water goes still before it freezes. "You knew him," Margot said, not a question. "Everyone knew Silas. This is a small town." Emma's voice was steady, but her hands had folded together on the table, fingers interlaced tight enough to show white at the knuckles. "He was a good man, cared about people, cared about this place." "What happened to him?" "He went hiking. Didn't come back. Search and rescue looked for 2 weeks. Nothing." The words came out practiced, like she'd said them enough times to smooth the rough edges. "Sheriff ruled it misadventure, case closed." "But you don't think so?" Emma looked at Margot for a long moment. Some kind of assessment happening behind her eyes. Some calculation about risk and trust and whether honesty was worth the cost. Finally, she leaned forward. Her voice dropped low enough that the librarian at the front desk couldn't hear. "3 weeks before Silas disappeared, he came to the school, asked if I'd keep copies of some documents for him. Said he didn't trust leaving them at the church, didn't trust his office, didn't trust anywhere that people knew to look." She stopped. "I asked him why. He said because he'd found something that powerful people wanted to stay buried and he needed insurance." "Did you keep the documents?" "For 2 weeks. Then he came back, said he'd found a better place, took them all." Emma's jaw tightened. 4 days later, he was gone. Callan slid the letter across the table. Silas's handwriting, Silas's words. "If you're reading this, your dog heard what I couldn't say." Emma read it slowly. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Just blinked hard twice and pushed the letter back. "He's dead, isn't he?" she said. "We don't know," Margot replied honestly, "but someone wanted him silent. Question is whether they got what they wanted." Emma looked at the environmental reports, at the satellite images, at the evidence, scattered across the table like pieces of a puzzle that was starting to show its picture. "You're going to ask questions." "Already started." "Then you should know something." Emma pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos, found one, and turned the screen toward them. This was taken 6 months before Silas disappeared. Church picnic. The photo showed a group of people gathered around picnic tables. Silas in the center, smiling hair, graying at the temples, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. And standing beside him, one hand on his shoulder, in a gesture that could have been friendship or ownership, was Gideon Mercer. "They were friends?" Margot asked. "That's what Silas thought. Right up until he went to Gideon with the soil samples, and Gideon told him the best thing he could do for Pine Ridge was forget what he'd found." The temperature in the library felt like it dropped 10 degrees. "Silas told you that?" "He told Father Alcott in confession." "I know because Father Alcott told me after Silas disappeared. Broke the seal because he thought it might save a life." Emma's voice was flat now, drained of inflection. "Father's been carrying that guilt for 3 years. Thinks if he'd spoken up sooner, maybe Silas would still be here." Margot exchanged a look with Callan, saw the same cold understanding settling into his expression. Gideon Mercer hadn't just covered up contamination. He'd betrayed a friend to do it. "Where's Father Alcott now?" Callan asked. "At the church, where he always is." They found Father Jameson Alcott in the sanctuary, kneeling in front of the altar, with his hands folded and his head bowed. Not praying exactly, more like listening for something he couldn't quite hear. He was older than Margot expected. Mid-50s hair gone mostly gray, wearing black clergy clothes that had been mended at the elbows. His face carried the worn patience of someone who'd spent decades hearing confessions and offering absolutions and wondering whether any of it made a difference. When he heard their footsteps, he stood, turned, saw the dogs first, then the people attached to them. "Service animals?" he asked. His voice was gentle, but it carried an edge underneath. The tone of someone who'd learned to read people the way Margot read case files. "Working dogs," Margot said. "Retired FBI, retired Navy. And you're here about Silas." It wasn't a question. Margot wondered how many times in 3 years Father Alcott had looked up to see someone standing in his church asking about the man who'd vanished. "Emma Lassiter sent us," Callan said. Father Alcott's expression shifted. Not relief exactly, more like resignation. The look of someone who'd been waiting for this conversation and dreading it in equal measure. "Then you know about the confession." "We know Silas went to Gideon Mercer with evidence of contamination. We know Gideon told him to stay quiet." "He told him more than that." Father Alcott walked to the front pew and sat heavily. "He told him that if the truth came out, the town would die. That the company responsible employed 140 people from Pine Ridge and the surrounding county. That shutting them down meant unemployment, poverty, families leaving, schools closing. He made it sound like mercy, like choosing silence was choosing to save lives." Margot sat in the pew across from him. Ranger settled at her feet, and Titan took position beside Callan. Both dogs were calm but watchful, reading the space the way they'd been trained to read everything. "And Silas didn't believe him," Margot said. "Silas believed in truth. He believed that poison in the ground was poison regardless of how many jobs it created. He believed that lying to protect the present just created a worse future." Father Alcott's hands were shaking slightly. He came to confession 3 days before he disappeared. Said he'd hidden the evidence somewhere safe. Said if anything happened to him, someone would find it eventually. Did he say where? No, just that it was in a place that made sense if you understood what had been done. The rail car, hidden in the clearing where the first barrels had been dumped. A monument to the crime it documented. "What do you think happened to him?" Callan asked. Father Alcott looked at the altar, at the cross hanging above it, at the stained glass windows that turned afternoon light into colors that didn't exist in nature. "I think he made a choice between his safety and his conscience, and I think he knew what that choice would cost him." The door at the back of the church opened. Footsteps confident and measured crossing the stone floor with the easy rhythm of someone who belonged here. Gideon Mercer stopped halfway down the aisle when he saw them. His smile was already in place, perfect and practiced. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Thorne," he said pleasantly. "I didn't expect to find you here. Settling in all right." Ranger's reaction was immediate. No growl this time, just a rigid stillness that spoke louder than sound. Titan mirrored at her from Callan's side, both dogs locked in the same silent judgment they'd rendered at the diner. Gideon's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Awareness. Calculation. The brief recognition that he was being measured by something he couldn't manipulate. "Your dogs don't seem to like me much," he said lightly. "They're particular," Margot replied. "So I see." He turned his attention to Father Alcott. "Father, I was hoping to catch you. The development committee is meeting Thursday to discuss the new community center proposal. I wanted to make sure the church was represented." Father Alcott stood slowly. "I'll be there, Gideon." "Excellent." Gideon pulled out his phone, made a show of checking the time. "I won't keep you. Just wanted to extend the invitation." He looked back at Margot and Callan. "If you two need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. That's what I'm here for." He left the same way he'd entered. Confident, unhurried, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive cologne and something else. Something both dogs continued to track long after he was gone. "He comes here often?" Margot asked. "Once a week," Father Alcott said quietly. "Always has a reason, always stays just long enough to remind me that he's watching." The implications settled over them like snow. Quiet cold covering everything. Outside the church, standing on the steps with the afternoon light failing toward evening, Callan pulled out his phone. No missed calls, no messages, just the weight of knowledge and the question of what to do with it. "We could leave," he said, not a suggestion, just stating the option. "We could," Margot agreed. They both knew they wouldn't. The radio in Margot's truck crackled to life. She'd left it on, monitoring the county emergency frequency out of habit. The voice that came through was tight with controlled panic. "All units, we have a report of a missing child. Liam Burke, age 9, last seen near the old industrial zone north of town. Parents say he was riding his bike on the trail. Bike found abandoned. Child not with it. Margot's stomach went cold. The industrial zone. The same area where the contamination was concentrated. Where Silas had found the evidence. Where the rail car sat hidden in the forest. Search teams are organizing at the fire station. We need volunteers with outdoor experience. Repeat, we need volunteers. She looked at Ranger. The dog was already standing ears forward, body coiled tight with purpose. Ready. Callan had Titan on his feet too. Your dog track. She's FBI trained. Explosives contraband and human remains. Margot paused. She can find living humans too. Just usually doesn't have to. Titan's combat search and rescue. Found insurgents hiding in places we didn't think anyone could fit. Callan's jaw was set. Kid's been missing how long? Margot checked her watch. Radio said bike was found 30 minutes ago. Probably went missing an hour before that. In search and rescue, there was a window, a period where the difference between found and lost came down to minutes, not hours. After that, the statistics got ugly fast. They were still inside the window. Barely. We go, Callan said. They went. The fire station was organized chaos by the time they arrived. Sheriff's deputies coordinating with volunteer firefighters, parents clutching photos of a brown-haired boy with gap teeth in a superhero backpack. The mother's face was pale, eyes red from crying she was trying to control. The father stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, looking like he wanted to punch through walls, but didn't know which wall would help. Margot approached the deputy coordinating the search. Showed her old FBI credentials, the ones that said retired but still carried weight. K-9 handler, she said. Specialized in search. This is Callan Thorne, Navy SEAL, also K-9. We can help. The deputy looked at Ranger, then at Titan. Both dogs sat at attention, professional, disciplined, radiating the calm competence that came from years of working in situations where mistakes meant casualties. Search is being called off until morning, the deputy said. Too dangerous to go into that zone at night. Industrial equipment, unstable ground, contamination risks. Contamination? Margot's voice was sharp. The deputy hesitated. Old dumping site. Company that owned it went bankrupt years ago. Cleanup was supposed to happen, but funding fell through. Area's been restricted ever since. Restricted. Not cleaned, not safe. Just marked with signs that said, keep out and left to poison the ground. Kid doesn't know it's restricted, Callan said quietly. Kid just knows it's forest. The deputy's face was tight. I understand. But I can't authorize volunteers to go into a contaminated zone at night. Liability safety protocols. I'm not asking for authorization. Margot's voice was flat. I'm telling you we're going. You can coordinate with us or not. Your choice. The deputy opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the parents who were watching the conversation with desperate hope. If you find him, the deputy said finally, call it in immediately. Don't try to extract on your own. We'll have medical standing by. Margot nodded once, turned to the parents. I need something with his scent, shirt jacket, anything he wore recently. The mother pulled a hoodie from her bag, small blue with a cartoon character Margot didn't recognize. It smelled like laundry detergent and kid sweat and fear. Perfect. Margot knelt beside Ranger. Let the dog scent the hoodie thoroughly. Ranger's nose worked the fabric with systematic precision, cataloging every molecule, building a scent profile that would cut through forest and rain and time. Beside them, Callan did the same with Titan. Both dogs locked on. Ready. Fine, Margot said. They found the bike first, small red lying on its side in the dirt near the trailhead. Training wheels still attached, which meant the kid was young enough to need them, brave enough to ride this far anyway. Ranger's nose hit the ground immediately, picking up the scent trail where the boy had abandoned the bike and gone into the forest. Titan worked parallel 20 feet to the right, covering more ground, doubling their chances. The trail led deeper, away from the main path into terrain that got rougher with every 100 yards. Trees grew closer together. Undergrowth thickened, and beneath it all, the smell of earth that wasn't quite right. Soil that carried the chemical signature of things that shouldn't be there. Contamination. Real, present, invisible. Margot's flashlight cut through the growing darkness, illuminating broken branches, disturbed leaves, the small footprints of a child who'd wandered farther than intended and didn't know how to get back. Ranger moved with purpose, nose down, tail straight out behind her. The posture of a dog locked on target. Every few yards she'd pause, verify the scent, correct course slightly. Never losing it, never hesitating. 30 minutes in the forest opened into a small clearing, and there, sitting against a fallen log, with his arms wrapped around his knees and tears streaming down his face, was Liam Burke. He looked up when the flashlights found him, saw two adults and two large dogs emerging from the darkness. His face crumpled between relief and fresh terror. "It's okay," Margot said, keeping her voice soft. "We're here to help. Your parents sent us." Liam's breath came in hitching sobs. "I got lost. I tried to find the trail, but everything looked the same, and I heard noises, and I couldn't." "You did great," Kellen said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "You stayed in one place. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Smart kid." Ranger approached slowly, letting Liam see her coming. The dog's entire demeanor shifted. Not the disciplined K9 anymore. Something softer. She lowered her head, touched her nose to Liam's hand, and sat beside him, close enough to be warm, close enough to be comfort. Liam's hand buried itself in Ranger's fur. He held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and uncertain. Margot keyed her radio. "This is Hayes. We have the child. He's safe. Coordinates are..." She rattled off their position using the GPS on her phone. The response came back immediately. Relief instructions, the promise of medical support meeting them at the trailhead. Callan checked Liam over quickly. No injuries, no signs of exposure beyond cold and fear. Just a kid who'd gotten in over his head and been terrified, alone in the dark. "Can you walk?" Callan asked. Liam nodded, stood on shaky legs. Ranger stood with him, staying close, letting the boy keep one hand on her back. They walked out together, slowly, carefully following the same trail they'd used to come in. Titan-led Ranger stayed beside Liam and Margot, and Callan bracketed them both. At the trailhead, Liam's parents were waiting. The mother saw her son and made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream, just pure relief given voice. Liam ran to them. The parents collapsed around him, holding tight, saying his name over and over like a prayer. The mother looked up at Margot through tears. "Thank you, thank you." "I don't know how to..." "Your son's brave," Margot said, "and smart. He did everything right." The father shook Callan's hand, then Margot's, then knelt to run his hands over both dogs. "Thank you," he said to Ranger. "Thank you," he said to Titan. Neither dog responded. They just stood there accepting gratitude with the patience of animals who understood that human emotion required space to exist. As the ambulance pulled away with Liam and his parents, the deputy approached Margot and Callan. "That was good work." "That was lucky timing," Margot replied. "Whatever it was, you brought him back." The deputy paused. "About that contaminated zone, you should know there's been talk of reopening it for development. Some company wants to build an industrial park, bring in jobs, revitalize the economy." Margot's blood went cold. "Who's the company?" "Not sure. Goes through a development consultant. Guy named Mercer." Of course it did. They drove back to town in silence. Both trucks, both dogs, both humans processing what they'd found and what it meant. At the church, Margot pulled over. Callan stopped behind her. She got out, walked to his window. "The contaminated zone where we found Liam. That's the same area Silas documented." "I know. Gideon wants to develop it. Put buildings on poisoned ground. Put people in those buildings." "I know," Callan said again. His voice was flat. "We have to stop him." "I know." He looked at her through the open window. "But knowing and proving are different things. And proving without ending up like Silas is harder still." Margot looked back at her truck where Ranger sat in the passenger seat, amber eyes watching. Patient. Waiting. "My dog refuses to leave," she said quietly. "Mine too." It wasn't a decision. Not really. The decision had been made the moment Ranger sat down in the clearing and wouldn't get in the truck. The moment both dogs read Gideon Mercer and arrived at the same conclusion. Sometimes you didn't choose to stay. Sometimes staying chose you. "Tomorrow," Margot said, "we start excavating the dump site, get soil samples that can't be disputed, evidence that holds up in court." Callan nodded. "And if Gideon notices, let him notice. Let him wonder what we're doing. Let him make mistakes. People who make mistakes tend to get desperate. Desperate people do ugly things. Then we make sure we see them coming." She walked back to her truck. Ranger's tail thumped once against the seat when Margot climbed in. Approval. Or maybe just acknowledgement. With dogs, sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. The last thing Margot saw as she pulled away was Callan in his rearview mirror, Titan's dark shape beside him, both of them outlined in the glow of streetlights that made the night look softer than it was. Tomorrow they'd dig up truth. Tonight they'd earn the right to rest. But rest didn't come easy. And in the darkness, somewhere between sleep and waking, Margot heard Silas Crow's words again. Listen to your dog. They know when something's wrong before we do. Ranger knew. Titan knew. The question was whether anyone else would listen before it was too late. Morning came with the kind of cold that made breathing hurt. Margot stood in the clearing where the rail car sat, watching her breath turn to fog and air that smelled like pine needles and something chemical underneath. Something wrong that her nose couldn't quite identify, but her body recognized as threat. Ranger circled the perimeter, nose down, methodical. She'd been at it for 20 minutes, mapping the contamination through scent alone, building a picture of what had been buried here that no satellite image could show. Callan arrived with Titan and a pickup bed full of equipment. Shovels, soil sample kits, GPS markers, the kind of gear you needed when you were documenting a crime scene that had been sitting open to the weather for 3 years. Sleep? He asked. Some. Margot pulled on work gloves. You enough. Which meant no, but neither of them was going to waste time pretending rest mattered more than what they were about to do. They started digging at the coordinates Silas had marked on his map. Shallow at first, just scraping back topsoil and leaf litter. Then deeper, where the earth changed color. Where brown turned to gray, and gray turned to black, and black carried the slick texture of soil that had been saturated with compounds that would take centuries to break down. Margot filled sample containers with the methodical precision of someone who testified in federal court and knew that chain of custody mattered as much as evidence itself. Each container labeled GPM, stamped, photographed, and placed before extraction. 3 feet down, Callan's shovel hit something solid. Metal. They cleared the dirt carefully, revealing the curve of a barrel, industrial-grade 55-gallon, painted in colors that had faded to ghosts of themselves. The manufacturer's stamp was still visible on the side. A company logo Margot didn't recognize, and beneath it, a date, 14 years ago. This has been here longer than Silas knew, Callan said quietly. Margot photographed the barrel from 6 angles, then took a sample of the sludge that had leaked from seams eaten through by rust. The smell when the container opened made her eyes water. Petroleum derivatives, heavy metals, something that burned in her sinuses like acid. Ranger sneezed twice and backed away, shaking her head. Even Titan, who tracked explosives through sewers in Iraq, gave the barrel a wide berth. They found 3 more before noon. All the same, all leaking, all poisoning the ground in a radius that extended far beyond what Silas's maps had shown. This isn't just contamination, Margot said, sealing another sample. This is systematic dumping. Multiple incidents over years. And Gideon knew. Callan stood, wiped soil from his hands. Had to. This much material doesn't get buried without permits, without contracts, without someone signing off that it was going to the right facility. Instead, it came here, to land nobody wanted in a forest nobody checked. Until Silas checked. Margot looked at the rail car sitting at the edge of the clearing like a monument to everything that had been hidden here. He must have found the first barrel by accident, started investigating, realized what he'd discovered. Spent months documenting before he took it to anyone. And when he took it to Gideon thinking he was taking it to a friend, Callan didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Margot's phone buzzed. Signal had been intermittent this deep in the forest, but messages came through in bursts when it connected. Emma Lassiter, 3 words, Father needs you. They loaded the equipment fast, securing the site as best they could. Margot marked the GPS coordinates, took final photographs, made sure nothing they'd done would compromise the evidence if someone else came looking. The drive back to town took 15 minutes that felt like an hour. They found Father Alcott at the church, sitting in the front pew with his hands folded and his face carrying the hollowed-out expression of someone who'd just been given information that rearranged their understanding of the world. Emma stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder. She looked up when Margot and Callan entered. Her eyes were red. What happened? Margot asked. Father Alcott pulled an envelope from his jacket. Old paper yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax that had cracked from age. This arrived this morning, in the collection box. No postage, no return address, just my name. How did this get here? Margot asked, examining the envelope closely. No postage, no postmark. Father Alcott's hands trembled as he spoke. It was in the collection box this morning. Someone put it there during the night. Silas came back, Emma said quietly. He's been close this whole time. Watching, waiting for the right moment. Callan pulled out his phone, checked the church's exterior. You have security cameras. Old system. Hasn't worked in 2 years. Father Alcott's voice was heavy with regret. I should have fixed it. He knew that, Margot said. He knew he could come back without being recorded. Knew you'd find the letter. Knew it was time. Father Alcott handed the envelope to Margot. She opened it carefully, aware that whatever was inside had the weight of revelation. A letter. handwritten in the same script as the one they'd found in the rail car. Father Jameson, if you're reading this, it means I'm alive. It means I've been hiding long enough to know whether staying hidden was cowardice or survival. I'm still deciding. 3 years ago, I made a choice. I chose silence over truth because Gideon Mercer convinced me that telling the truth would destroy this town. He showed me employment figures, tax revenues, projections, the mathematics of what happens when 140 jobs disappear from an economy this small. He made it sound like mercy. But silence isn't mercy. Silence is just another way of choosing who gets hurt and who gets protected. And I chose wrong. The contamination is worse than I documented. The dumping went on for years before I found it. The barrels I recorded were just the most recent deposits. There are more, deeper, spread across areas that are going to be developed if Gideon gets his permits approved. He's going to build an industrial park on top of poison, put workers in buildings on contaminated ground. Tell them it's economic revitalization while their children play in soil that will make them sick. I couldn't stop it from hiding. So I'm coming back. By the time you read this, I'll be in Pine Ridge. I'll be at the old cabin on the North Ridge, the one my father built before the forest reclaimed it. If someone needs to find me, if someone needs the rest of the evidence I collected, tell them to follow the dogs. Dogs know. They always know. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stay. I'm trying to be brave enough to come back. Silas Margot read it twice. Callan read over her shoulder. When they finished, the silence in the church was absolute. He's alive, Emma said. Her voice shook. He's been alive this whole time. Father Alcott's hands were trembling. 3 years. I thought he was dead. I carried that guilt for 3 years. He's not dead, Margot said. He's hiding, and he's ready to testify. Callan pulled out his phone, opened a mapping app, started searching for cabins on the North Ridge. How many structures are up there? Only one I know of, Father Alcott said. Built in the 60s by Silas's father. Hasn't been used in decades. Forrest should have taken it by now. Then that's where we go. Margot looked at Ranger. The dog was already standing ears forward, reading the urgency in the room. Today, before Gideon realizes Silas is back. If Gideon finds out before we get to him. Emma stopped. Couldn't finish. Then we don't let Gideon find out. Wittig Callan was already moving toward the door. We get Silas, we get his evidence, and we take all of it to someone who can't be bought. Who? Father Alcott's voice was sharp. County officials are compromised. State level is too far removed to care. Who exactly is going to listen? Margot thought of her old contacts in the FBI. People she'd trusted before the betrayal that ended her career. People who might still take a call from a retired agent with evidence of environmental crimes that cross state lines. I know someone, she said, but I need Silas alive to make the case. They left the church moving fast. Emma stayed with Father Alcott, both of them already making calls, activating whatever network of trust still existed in a town where trust had been weaponized against itself. The North Ridge Road was worse than the one that led to Margot's property. Barely a road at all, really. More like a suggestion that vehicles had passed this way once, and the forest had begrudgingly allowed it. Callan's truck led four-wheel drive engaged, pushing through ruts that could swallow an axle. Margot followed Ranger braced in the passenger seat, amber eyes locked forward with the intensity of a dog who understood they were racing against something invisible. 2 miles in the sky changed. Clouds that had been threatening all morning finally made good on their promise. Lightning cracked across the horizon, followed by thunder that rolled through the valley like artillery. Then rain. Heavy, immediate, the kind that turned dirt roads to mud in minutes. We need to move faster, Callan's voice came through the radio. Road won't take it, Margot replied. We push too hard, we get stuck. Another flash of lightning, closer this time. Close enough that Margot counted 3 seconds before the thunder hit. And then Ranger started barking. Not the controlled, alert bark she used for explosives. Not the measured warning bark for threats. This was something older, more primal. The bark of a dog who'd scented something that overrode training and discipline and went straight to instinct. Fire. Margot looked through the windshield and saw smoke rising above the tree line. Gray at first, then black, then orange, as flames found something that wanted to burn. Callan, she said into the radio. North Ridge, fire. I see it. His voice was tight. Has to be the lightning strike. Except lightning didn't strike in patterns. Lightning didn't start fires that spread in lines designed to cut off access roads and burn towards specific targets. This wasn't natural. This was arson. Margot hit the accelerator. The truck, fishtailed and mud-caught, surged forward. Behind her, Callan's vehicle matched speed, both of them racing towards smoke that was already thick enough to blot out the sky. The cabin appeared through the trees like something conjured from nightmares. Small, old, surrounded by forest that was already burning. Flames climbed the pines in spirals, jumping from tree to tree with the hungry efficiency of fire that had been fed accelerant. And in front of the cabin, trying to drag boxes of documents through the door, while smoke poured around him, was a man in his 60s with gray hair and a face Margot recognized from the church picnic photo. Silas Crow, alive, desperate, running out of time. Margot was out of the truck before it fully stopped. Ranger hit the ground beside her, immediately dropping low beneath the smoke layer, breathing through her nose, despite the heat that had to be searing her lungs. "Silas?" Margot shouted. He looked up, saw her, saw Callan running from the other direction. Saw two German shepherds moving through smoke like they'd been trained for exactly this, which they had. "The evidence?" Silas's voice was raw from smoke. "I can't leave it. It's the only proof that can't be disputed." Callan reached the cabin first, grabbed Silas by the arm. Where, inside, 3 boxes, filing cabinet. "Show me." They went in together. Margot stayed outside with the keys, watching the fire spread with mathematical precision. Not random, not natural. Someone had set this. Someone who knew Silas was here, knew what he had knew, that burning it all was cleaner than trying to steal it. A beam cracked above the cabin's entrance. Margot's heart stopped. "Callan," his voice came back muffled by smoke and distance. "Got it. Coming out." They emerged in a rush. Callan carrying 2 boxes, Silas dragging the third, both of them coughing hard enough that their whole bodies shook. And then the doorframe collapsed. Not completely, just enough that the burning timber fell inward, blocking the entrance, cutting off escape for anyone still inside. Except there was someone still inside. Ranger. The dog had circled to the back of the cabin while the humans were focused on the front, had scented something they'd missed. Had gone in through a window that was too small for humans, but perfect for a German shepherd who'd made a career of going places nobody thought she could fit. Margot's blood turned to ice. Ranger, a bark from inside. Not panicked, purposeful. The bark that meant I found something. Margot ran to the back window. Through smoke thick enough to choke on, she saw Ranger dragging something across the floor. Not boxes, something heavier. Something that didn't want to move. Another person. "There's someone else in there!" Margot screamed. Callan dropped the boxes and ran. Titan was ahead of him, already diving through the window his handler couldn't fit through. Both dogs inside now, both working with the synchronized precision of animals who understood that time was measured in seconds, and seconds were running out. Margot grabbed Silas. "Who else is in there?" "Nobody. I've been alone for—" He stopped. His face went white. "Emma, she texted this morning. Said she was coming to check on me. I told her not to, but she's stubborn, and she doesn't." Emma, the teacher who'd kept Silas's secrets, who'd trusted him enough to hide evidence, who'd believed in truth hard enough to put herself at risk. She was inside a burning cabin, being dragged to safety by 2 dogs who'd never met her, but understood that human life was worth protecting. The window wasn't big enough. Callan made it big enough. He grabbed a rock the size of his head and smashed the window frame, breaking away wood that had been rotted by years and dried by fire until it came apart like paper. The opening grew, large enough for dogs, large enough for humans. Ranger emerged first, Emma's jacket in her teeth, pulling with strength that came from somewhere beyond training. Titan had Emma's other arm, both dogs working in tandem like they'd practiced this extraction 1,000 times. Emma's face was gray. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't moving. Margot and Callan pulled her through the window and into air that was only slightly less toxic than what she'd been breathing. Margot tilted Emma's head back, checked for breath. Nothing. She started compressions, hard, fast, counting aloud to keep rhythm. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Callan was on the radio calling for emergency services, giving coordinates, describing injuries he couldn't see yet, but could guess. Ranger stood over Emma, nose inches from her face, whining with an urgency that sounded almost human. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Emma gasped. Not a breath, a gap, violent, desperate, the sound of lungs that had forgotten how to work being shocked back into function. Her eyes opened, unfocused, streaming tears from smoke, but open. "Easy," Margot said. "Don't try to talk. Just breathe." Emma coughed so hard she doubled over. Margot supported her, kept her upright, let the poison come out in violent spasms that sounded like drowning on dry land. Behind them, the cabin roof collapsed. Fire consumed everything inside. Documents, evidence, the physical proof that Silas had spent 3 years collecting. Gone. Silas stared at the burning structure with the expression of a man watching his life's work turn to ash. It's all gone. Everything I saved. Everything I hid. Not everything, Callan said. He was standing over the 3 boxes they'd extracted. We got these. Silas looked at the boxes, then at the cabin, then at Emma, who was still coughing but alive. She came to warn me. Someone told her the fire department received a call about smoke on the North Ridge. She drove up to make sure I got out. Who called the fire department? Margot asked. Don't know. Anonymous tip. Anonymous. Just like the tip that probably told Gideon where to find Silas. Just like the message that probably triggered the arson. Someone was playing both sides, trying to burn evidence while maintaining plausible deniability. The sound of engines cut through the rain and smoke, emergency vehicles coming fast up the road they'd barely navigated, fire trucks, ambulance, the full response for a wildfire in a drought year. Except this wasn't drought, this was October in Minnesota. Everything should have been too wet to burn this fast. Unless it had help. The fire chief was a woman in her 50s who took one look at the cabin and knew exactly what she was seeing. Not natural, not accidental, not even good arson, just desperate arson, the kind committed by someone who had more fear than skill. Accelerant, she said, pointing to scorched patterns that even Margot could read. Multiple points of origin. This was set deliberately. We know, Margot said. The chief's eyes were sharp. You know who? We have suspicions, nothing we can prove yet. Better prove it fast. Fire this size this close to town with the wind shifting east. The chief's expression was grim. This thing could jump the ridge and take out half of Pine Ridge before we get it contained. Margot looked at the smoke rising into a sky that was already dark with storm clouds. Watched the wind push flames in directions that would spread the fire instead of containing it. This wasn't just about destroying evidence anymore. This was about destroying the entire town. Gideon Mercer had calculated that burning Silas and his proof was worth the risk of burning everything else. That insurance payouts and disaster relief would cover the cost. That a town reduced to ash could be rebuilt as whatever he wanted it to be. Clean slate. No contamination. No witnesses. No history. Just profit. Margot pulled out her phone, dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. A number that belonged to a special agent in the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit who'd told her once that if she ever found something worth risking a career over, he wanted to know. This qualified. The phone rang 3 times. Margot counted each ring like a countdown. Then a voice. Male familiar carrying the particular weariness of someone who'd spent too many years cleaning up other people's messes. Hayes, didn't expect to hear from you. Marcus, I need a favor. Last time you needed a favor, it ended with a senator's chief of staff in federal custody. What are we talking about this time? Environmental crimes, illegal dumping, arson, conspiracy, and about 3 hours before a wildfire destroys the evidence. A pause, then the sound of Marcus standing up from whatever desk he'd been sitting at. Send me coordinates. I'm calling in the team. Margot rattled off GPS data while watching the fire spread. Every second mattered. Every minute was ground lost to flames that didn't care about justice or truth or the people trying to protect both. How solid is your evidence? Marcus asked. Soil samples, photographs, witness testimony from a man who's been hiding for 3 years because he was afraid of being disappeared. Afraid of who? Development consultant named Gideon Mercer. Connected, respected, smart enough to make murder look like misadventure. And you're sure he's behind the arson? Margot looked at Ranger. The dog sat at attention, smoke-stained and exhausted, still watching the tree line for threats. Then at Titan doing the same from Callan's side. 2 dogs who'd read Gideon Mercer the first time they met him, who'd warned their handlers through body language that didn't lie. I'm sure, Margot said. Then I'll see you in 3 hours. Keep your witnesses alive until then. The line went dead. Margot looked at Callan, who was helping Emma into the ambulance despite her protest that she could walk. Looked at Silas, who was protecting the 3 boxes of evidence like they were his children. Looked at the fire spreading across the ridge with the inexorable hunger of something that had been set loose and wouldn't stop until it consumed everything in its path. 3 hours. They just had to survive 3 hours. The fire jumped the ridge at hour 2. Margot saw it happen from the evacuation center the town had set up in the elementary school gym. One moment the flames were contained on the north side. The next embers were landing in dry brush a quarter-mile east, igniting spot fires that multiplied faster than crews could suppress them. The wind was pushing everything toward Pine Ridge, toward the church, toward Dot's Diner, toward 847 people who'd built their lives in a place they thought was safe. Emergency services were evacuating the outer neighborhoods. Cars streamed toward the highway in lines that moved too slow. Parents clutched children. Elderly residents clutched photographs. Everyone clutched whatever they decided mattered most in the 10 minutes they'd been given to pack. Gideon Mercer stood at the edge of the evacuation center, talking on his phone with the calm professionalism of someone managing a crisis. To anyone watching, he looked like a concerned citizen coordinating relief efforts. But Margot watched his eyes, watched the way they tracked the fire's progress, watched the calculations happening behind them. He was measuring, assessing, deciding how much had to burn before the problem was solved. Ranger growled low in her chest, so low Margot felt it more than heard it. Callan appeared beside her, Titan at his side. FB, en route. 40 minutes out. Fire will be in town in 20. Margot looked at the smoke obscuring the sky, at the orange glow visible even through daylight, at the ash falling like snow. We need to stop it, she said. Can't stop a wildfire. Can stop what started it? Margot turned to face Callan fully. Gideon set this. He's the only one with motive, the only one who knew where Silas was, the only one who benefits from all of this burning. Knowing and proving. I know, Margot's voice was sharp. But if this town burns while we're waiting for proof, there won't be anything left worth protecting. Callan's expression was unreadable. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we ask Gideon some questions. See how he responds when he knows we're not going away. And if he runs, then we let the dogs tell us which way to chase him. They found Gideon in the parking lot, still on his phone, still projecting calm. He looked up when Margot and Callan approached with both German shepherds flanking them. His smile was automatic, perfect, meaningless. Ms. Hayes, Mr. Thorne, terrible situation. I've been coordinating with the county to make sure. Where were you between 10 and 11 this morning? Margot's voice cut through his pleasantries like a blade. Gideon's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. I'm sorry. This morning, the fire on the North Ridge started at approximately 10:40. Arson. Multiple points of origin. Where were you? I was at my office. Why? Anyone verify that? Now the smile faltered, just slightly, just enough to show that Margot's questions weren't the ones he'd been expecting. My assistant can confirm my schedule. Why are you asking? Because a fire started on the North Ridge. Multiple points of origin. Accelerant detected. Arson. That's terrible, but I don't see what that has to do with... Silas Crow was at that cabin. Margot watched Gideon's face carefully. Watched for the micro-expression that would give him away. He survived. So did his evidence. There, a flicker in Gideon's eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. The look of someone who'd been told something they already knew but had hoped to keep hidden. He'd known Silas was there, had known what he was protecting, had known exactly where to send someone to burn it all. Silas is alive. Gideon's voice carried perfect notes of shock and relief. That's wonderful news. We all thought, he's alive, Callan said quietly, and ready to testify. About what? About contamination you helped cover up, about dumping you authorized, about the conversation where you told him to stay silent or watch the town die. Gideon's expression went very still. The smile disappeared, entirely replaced by something harder, colder. The face of a man who'd run out of patience for pretending. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. You're new here. You don't understand how this town works, how fragile the economy is, how many people depend on jobs that wouldn't exist if every environmental regulation was enforced to the letter. So you broke the law, Margot said. I protected livelihoods. There's a difference. Not in a courtroom. Gideon stepped closer, not threatening, just close enough to make the space between them feel compressed, intimate, the distance where quiet words carried more weight than shouted ones. You found contaminated soil, he said softly. Congratulations. You found barrels that were dumped by a company that went bankrupt a decade ago. You found evidence of crimes committed by people who are dead or beyond prosecution. What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish? Justice, Callan said. Gideon laughed, actually laughed. Justice. You want to bring justice to a town that's about to burn. You want to prosecute crimes from 10 years ago while 800 people lose their homes today. He shook his head. I'm trying to save this place. You're trying to destroy it over something that can't be fixed. The dogs didn't need to growl anymore. Their verdict had been delivered twice already. Now they simply sat, amber eyes and dark eyes, both fixed on Gideon, with the patient certainty of animals who'd been proven right and were waiting for the humans to catch up. Gideon noticed. His eyes flicked to Ranger, then to Titan. Your dogs really don't like me. They're excellent judges of character, Margot said. Something dark flashed across Gideon's face. Then maybe you should wonder what that says about you, about what you're willing to sacrifice to be right. He walked away before Margot could respond. Back toward the evacuation center, back toward his phone and his coordination and his performance of caring. Callan watched him go. He's going to run. I know. We follow him, we find where he's going, what he's trying to hide. I know, Margot said again. They split up. Callan in his truck, Margot in hers, both following Gideon's car as it pulled out of the evacuation center and headed not toward the highway, not toward safety, but back toward town, back toward the contaminated zone, back toward evidence he hadn't managed to destroy yet. The road was empty. Everyone else was evacuating. Only 3 vehicles moving against the flow. Gideon's luxury sedan in front, Callan's truck behind Margot's, bringing up the rear with Ranger sitting tense in the passenger seat. They drove through smoke that was getting thicker, through ash that fell like snow, through air that tasted like burning and chemicals and the particular bitterness of things that shouldn't burn, but were. Gideon's car turned off the main road, down a service path that led to the industrial zone, to the place where Liam Burke had gotten lost, where barrels were buried, where the ground was poison, where Gideon had probably been planning to build his industrial park on top of contamination he'd helped hide. The car stopped. Gideon got out. Margot and Callan stopped 30 yards back, engines running, watching. Gideon walked to the edge of the contaminated zone and stood there looking at Earth that was already starting to smoke as the fire approached, looking at a secret that was about to burn along with everything else. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Margot couldn't hear what he said, but she saw his body language change, saw tension turn to panic, saw whatever conversation he was having turn into an argument he was losing. He ended the call, stood there for a long moment, then walked back to his car, got in, and drove away. Not toward town, not toward the highway, just away, running. We follow him. Callan's voice came through the radio. Margot looked at Ranger. The dog was staring at the contaminated zone nose, working the air, body trembling with the effort of staying still when everything in her wanted to move. No, Margot said. We let him run. FBI will find him. And if they don't, then he spends the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering when the truth catches up. But Ranger wasn't looking at where Gideon had gone. She was looking at the forest, at the smoke, at something that made her whine high and urgent, the sound of a dog who'd found something that humans couldn't see yet, but needed to know about. Margot followed her gaze and saw flames, not in the distance anymore. Here, now, moving through the industrial zone with terrifying speed, consuming brush that had been dried by chemicals leaching from buried barrels. The contaminated zone was burning, and when contaminated soil burned, it released everything it had been holding. Every chemical, every toxin, every poison that had been safely buried was about to become airborne, about to become a cloud that would drift over Pine Ridge and poison everyone in its path. Margot grabbed the radio. Callan, the zone's burning. We need to evacuate the town now to... Fire department. Fire department can't stop this. It's chemical. It's going to spread toxins through smoke. Anyone breathing this is going to get sick. She didn't wait for a response. Just hit the accelerator, turned the truck around, and drove toward town with Ranger braced beside her and fear clawing at her chest. They had minutes, maybe less. The evacuation center was chaos when they arrived. Margot ran inside, found the fire chief, grabbed her by the arm. The industrial zone is burning, contaminated soil, chemical smoke. You need to get everyone out, not toward the highway, away from the smoke plume. The chief's face went white. She understood immediately. Understood what chemical smoke meant, what breathing it meant. How long? Wind's pushing east, 15 minutes before it reaches town. The chief started shouting orders. Deputies moved, teachers moved, everyone who could help started loading people into vehicles and buses and anything with wheels. Margot found Silas. He was still protecting his 3 boxes, still looking like a man who'd lost everything and gained nothing. We need to go, Margot said. The evidence is safe. You're safe. That's what matters. Emma was beside him, still coughing but mobile. Father Alcott helped her stand, supported her weight. They loaded into vehicles. Margot's truck. Callan's a school bus driven by Dot with a determination that said she'd driven through worse and wasn't about to let smoke stop her now. The convoy left Pine Ridge heading south, away from the smoke, away from the fire, away from everything people had built and were now leaving behind. Margot watched the town disappear in her rearview mirror, watched smoke obscure the church steeple, watched flames touch the edge of town and start consuming structures that had stood for 100 years. Beside her, Ranger whined softly. Margot put a hand on her head. I know, I know. They drove until the smoke cleared, until the air was breathable again, until they could stop at a rest area 20 miles south and count heads and make sure everyone had made it out. Everyone had. 847 people. All alive, all safe, all homeless. Margot stood at the edge of the parking lot watching families huddle together, watching the elderly sit on curbs with expressions that said they'd lived through worse, but this still hurt. Callan appeared beside her. Titan sat at his feet, Ranger at hers. Both dogs watching the horizon like they were waiting for the next threat. FBI's at the cabin site, Callan said. Marcus called. They've got the soil samples, the photographs, everything we documented. And Gideon? Gone, left his car at the airport, probably on a plane by now. Margot nodded. It wasn't surprise, just confirmation. Silas's testimony will be enough, Callan continued. Combined with the physical evidence, they can build a case. Environmental crimes, conspiracy, arson, federal charges that cross state lines. Gideon's connected. He'll have lawyers. He'll have lawyers going up against the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit and a whistleblower who's been hiding for 3 years because he was afraid of being murdered. Callan paused. I like those odds. Margot looked at the people filling the rest area, at the town that no longer had a town, at the future that was going to have to be built from ash. What happens to them, she asked. Disaster relief, FEMA, insurance if they're lucky. Callan's voice was flat. Rebuilding, years of it. And the contamination? EPA will have to clean it now. Can't ignore it when it's literally burning. Superfund site designation, remediation, the whole process. Which meant Pine Ridge would be uninhabitable for years. Meant the people evacuating tonight weren't going home. Not tomorrow, not next month, maybe not ever. Meant Gideon had gotten exactly what he wanted, a clean slate, just not the way he'd planned. Margot's phone rang. Marcus. Hayes, we've got enough. Evidence is solid. Warrants being issued for Mercer and 3 executives at the company that commissioned the dumping. They're all going down. And the town, EPA's already mobilizing. Cleanup starts next week. It'll take time, but it'll happen. Marcus paused. You did good work. Saved a lot of lives today. Doesn't feel like it. Never does. But those people are breathing because you and that dog of yours wouldn't let it go. Remember that. The call ended. Margot stood with Ranger at her side, one hand resting on the dog's head. The warmth, the solidity, the absolute presence that had carried them through every moment when giving up would have been easier. Callan remained upright, too, Titan pressed against his leg, in the stance they'd held through firefights and rescues and every mission that mattered. 2 handlers, 2 dogs, standing together while a town burned behind them. And somewhere in the smoke, Pine Ridge was learning what it meant to lose everything. But it would rebuild, because the truth, once it started spreading, didn't stop until everything false had been consumed. And sometimes the only way to build something clean was to burn away everything rotten first, even when the burning hurt more than anyone wanted to admit. 6 months later, Margot stood in a federal courtroom in Minneapolis, watching Gideon Mercer be led away in handcuffs. The verdict had come down that morning. 14 counts. Conspiracy, environmental crimes, arson, accessory to attempted murder. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. Gideon's lawyers had been expensive. His defense had been meticulous. But Silas's testimony had been unshakable. The soil samples had been irrefutable. And the photographs of barrels leaking poison into ground where children played had spoken louder than any closing argument. In the gallery, Silas sat beside Father Alcott. Emma was there too, lungs healed, voice strong. Dot had closed the diner for the day to attend. She wore her best dress and held a handkerchief she didn't need because these weren't tears of sadness. These were tears of justice finally rendered. Gideon's eyes found Margot's as the bailiff led him past. No smile now, no charm. Just the hollow expression of a man who'd calculated everything except the possibility that 2 dogs and 2 stubborn handlers would refuse to look away. Ms. Hayes, he said quietly. Just those 2 words. Margot didn't respond, didn't need to. Ranger sat at her feet, calm and patient, amber eyes tracking Gideon the way she'd tracked him from the first moment they met. The dog had known. She'd always known. And now finally everyone else knew too. Outside the courthouse, Callan waited with Titan. Both dogs greeted each other with the easy familiarity of partners who'd worked the same case and seen it through to the end. Town's rebuilding, Callan said. EPA finished the cleanup last month. People are starting to move back. All of them. Most. Some found new places, decided to stay. But Pine Ridge is coming back. He paused. Father Alcott asked if you're coming to the dedication. Dedication? New church. They're naming it after Silas. He tried to refuse, but Dot threatened to stop serving him coffee if he didn't accept. Margot smiled, actually smiled. When next Sunday, noon. She looked down at Ranger. The dog looked back with eyes that held no opinion about churches or dedications or any of it. Just the steady certainty that wherever Margot went, she went too. We'll be there, Margot said. The new Pine Ridge Community Church stood on higher ground, away from the contaminated zone that was now a fenced Superfund site with warning signs and soil that would take another decade to fully remediate. The building was smaller than the old one, simpler. But the brass plaque above the door read the same words that had hung over the entrance Father Alcott had lost to fire. This door stays open. And beneath it a new addition, a dedication. In memory of courage, in honor of truth. For Silas Crow, who chose both. Margot stood in the back pew with Ranger at her feet. Callan sat beside her, tight and settled in the aisle. Both dogs wore their tactical harnesses, not because they were working, but because Father Alcott had insisted they be recognized for what they were. Heroes who'd never asked for the title. Silas stood at the pulpit, older grayer carrying the weight of 3 years in hiding and 6 months of testimony and the particular exhaustion that came from telling the truth until everyone finally believed it. We gather in a building raised from ash, he said. His voice was stronger than Margot expected, clearer. We gather as a town that was broken and chose to heal. We gather because silence failed and truth prevailed, and sometimes the hardest thing we can do is exactly what we must. Emma sat in the front row with her 4th grade class. 30 students who'd lost their school to fire and learned their lessons in temporary buildings, while Pine Ridge rebuilt itself one foundation at a time. Dot was there wearing the same dress she'd worn to the trial. Father Alcott sat beside her looking at the new church with the expression of a man who'd lost everything and found something better in its place. And in the parking lot outside, 2 trucks sat side by side, Margot's and Callan's, both still carrying equipment in the beds, both still ready for whatever came next. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the pause between missions. After the service, Margot walked to the old contaminated zone with Ranger, stood at the fence looking at earth that was finally being cleaned. Slowly, expensively, but cleaned. Callan appeared beside her. EPA says another 8 years. Then in 8 years, this'll be forest again. In the town, Margot looked back toward Pine Ridge, at buildings rising from ash, at people who'd chosen to come back instead of starting over somewhere easier. The town already is, she said. Ranger's tail thumped once against her leg. Titan's did the same against Callan's. 2 dogs who'd known the truth before anyone else had the courage to look for it. 2 handlers who'd learned to listen. And a town that had been saved not by heroes who arrived with answers, but by ordinary people who'd refused to accept lies. Margot pulled out her phone. A text from Marcus at the FBI. Got another case. Minnesota/Wisconsin border. Missing persons, possible environmental connection. Interested. She showed Callan the screen. He read it, looked at Titan. The dog looked back with dark eyes that said what they always said. Ready. Margot typed her response. We're in. Because some things you didn't walk away from. Some fights you kept fighting. Some truths you kept telling. Even when the telling cost everything you had, especially then.